everybody, and welcome to this week's show. Today, as you can see, we're going to be reviewing the albums of Genesis, band who existed from about 1968 to 2022. So, cut my maths, it's about 54, something like that, roughly. So, a truly great band, one of the great British prog rock bands who went a little bit poppy. There are almost 3 or 4 types of bands at different stages. One of the truly great bands, in my opinion. And this week's special guest, we've got back by popular demand, we've got Ursula. So before we start, Ursula, when did you first get into Genesis?
Well, I've sort of grown up with them, really. My oldest brother, he was a big Genesis fan back in the 70s, and I just remember him playing a lot of those records back then. And I spoke about it on the last sort of podcast we did, but I just just really was drawn into their music and all the sort of sleeves, the wonderful artwork on the sleeves. And as I got older, I thought, well, I better start buying these records myself, just to make sure I had them for my own collection. So I've had, I've been a fan really since childhood, really, all my life.
Right, good stuff. Well, for me, and again, we mentioned it on the other show, so feel free to check into the top 10 best songs show. So when we do catch some of those songs, we'll not go into the massive depth because we've already done it. But for me, and I think I said on the other show, it was when I had the record shop in the late 80s, and I listened to 2 albums. It was the live album, which I really liked, from '73. I thought was fantastic, and Foxtrot, obviously from the same period. And they were the first 2 albums, and I thought, whoa, what have I been missing all this time? And from that point onwards, I really started getting into them. So quite late, really. I've been in my late teens at the time, quite an unusual, sort of later period time to get into sort of that type of band, but absolutely love them and play them regularly, absolutely regularly. So yeah, so there we go. So we are going to rank their albums from 15 to 1. And there's a huge variation in quality for myself, and there's a huge range of styles amongst the band. 3 different singers, which is really unusual for any band. I mean, a lot of the great bands have had 2 different singers before when you think of bands like AC/DC or Pink Floyd or something like that. But to go 3 is really quite unusual. So in terms of doing studio albums, so we'll go through them. Right, before we do any of the ranking, I shall just quickly talk about how we rank them in terms of music ratings. So as you can see on the screen here, 5 stars clearly means it's a masterpiece album. 4.5 is essential, 4 is excellent, 3.5 is very good, 3 is a good album, 2 is fair, 2.5, sorry, is fair, 2 is weak, 1.5 is very poor, 1 is awful, and 0.5 is don't bother. And we've never had 1 yet. However, that may well change today, but we shall see. Without further ado, Ursula, if you'd like to kick us off with number 15. What have you got on at 15?
Okay, well, number 15, I've put Abacab. I love the song Abacab itself. It was a great single, but I think from the second track on, it just kind of goes on a decline, the whole album. They purposely set out to change direction when they were making this album. I mean, for their early fans, they're used to them being more progressive and creative and innovative. But for Abacab, they purposely changed, and sort of their songs got shorter and more poppier, and I mean, they achieved their goal. I mean, they they had a successful album, and they gained a load of new fans, and I think it even got to number 1. But to me, it was just too much of a radical change, because I was used to things like Supper's Ready and Entangled and One for the Vine, and then to hear things like Who Done It, and it just, some of the songs on it, I just think, oh no, it's just not to my liking at all. So for that reason, I put it at number 15 and give it a 1.5, I think.
Right, all right, 1.5. Okay, that's interesting. So 1.5 stars. We've gone very poor. Right. Okay, I think that's fair. For myself, I've gone in at number 15. I have gone in with Calling All Stations, the comeback album, if you like, with Ray Wilson on vocals. Oh God, I thought it was just appalling. I've got Blind album written on. It sounds like a Mike and the Mechanics album. I've written here, no redeemable features. I've just written generic dross is the phrase I've written on here. I've written in brackets here, they should have got someone like Fish to sing for them, and they could have went down somewhere, a route between both great singers. I think that would have been perfect. And this, for me, is one of the worst albums I've ever heard. And I have given it 0.5. I've written, which is literally don't bother. For me, it's one of the worst albums I've honestly, I was really looking forward to it. I've listened to every other album bar this one over the years, and I must have listened to this when it came out because I was a fan at the time, and I must have listened to it. I just can't remember. Maybe I blocked it out of my memory, and then I put it on, and I was like, honestly, I was like eating my hands by the end of it. It was so bad. So number 15 for me is their last album, Calling All Stations. What have you got in at number 14, Ursula?
Oh dear. Well, for number 14, I've put Invisible Touch. So, as you can probably tell, I'm not really an 80s Genesis fan at all, really. And I think this album, it had some fair songs in it, to be fair. You know, I liked a couple of the songs like Domino and Tonight, Tonight, Tonight. But I think it's just got the worst collection of singles on it. And that's what puts me off the album. For example, Land of Confusion, I just never liked that video. I just didn't like the song or the video. And Invisible Touch, it just gets played to death on the radio. I mean, I mean, when I'm driving along, if it comes on the radio, I've got to turn it off or I start getting a bit of road rage, you know, it's just on constantly. And the thing I don't like about it is they've got such a large body of work of excellent songs, and they seem to play the same songs all the time on the radio. I mean, you know, they've got so many good songs that could play, and it's always Invisible Touch. So so like I say, the singles on this album I dislike, but some of the album tracks are quite good. And for that reason, I put it at number 14, and I'll give it 2 out of 5, I think.
Okay, 2 stars. All right, still poor. For me at number 14, I've got From Genesis to Revelation. Again, I've listened to it a few times, obviously over the years, and you can hear the inkling of the start of the band. It's very, for me, I've just written 1969 half-formed folk type pop in the style of what the Bee Gees were doing at the time, but obviously nowhere near the quality of like sort of Barry Gibb's songwriting skills, who's a genius in my opinion, by the way. And I just, it's just not very good. Is all I can say. There's not much about it. The band are all right. They're pretty good. It's, some of that pastoral stuff that they go on and do magnificently later on is clearly evident at this point. But they're trying too hard to sound like other artists. And when you've got a singer of that quality, even at that age, you can tell he's a great singer. I mean, in the next album, you'll hear in particular that he's an incredible singer. And that's literally a year later. His voice is not used anywhere near to the ability that they should be doing. And for me, it's just a poor album. Bits and bobs, that sort of Jonathan King sort of made them sort of sound that way in many respects. Awful man, but that's another story. And again, dreadful album for me. Won't get played again, really. 1 star. Terrible is all I'm giving it. Quite harsh, but there you have it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think in the defense that there were only about 16 or 17,
Yep.
There was still school, so it was more like a school project than anything else, really. So I think in the defense, you could say that. But I see where you're coming from.
It is, but then we did a show on Free once before, and when they were recording their albums, they were like 15, 16, 17, and they were like getting 4 or 5 star albums because they were just amazing. So I obviously age is an issue. Without a shadow of a doubt, but yeah, not very good. So there you go. That's my number 14. What have you got on at 13?
Right, 13, I've got the one you don't like, which is Calling All Stations. I actually don't think it's a bad album, actually. It hasn't got, obviously, their greatest songs on, but I think it suffers in being called a Genesis album. I think if they rebranded themselves to, like Mike and Mechanics were called Mike and Mechanics, they should have called themselves like Tony and the Technicians or something, and called it a different name, and I think it would have got a different fan base, because actually some of the songs are all all right. I like Calling All Stations itself, and I like Congo, and there's no really irritating songs, you know, like Abacab and Invisible Touch had a couple of songs that I just can't listen to, but Calling All Stations, I think it did have one or two decent songs. And Ray Wilson, I think his voice was all right. I think it kind of suited the album. So so like I say, it's not a great album, but it's obviously not a typical Genesis album either. But I'll give it about two and a bit out of 5, because it was a good effort with a new singer, I think. So
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's a fair point. For me, I've gone in at number 13 with Abacab from 1981. Hugh Padgham was shifted in as engineer, and because they wanted that Peter Gabriel intruder sound, which is odd because I don't really hear it on the album. Maybe it's just me, but I don't hear it. And I think Hugh Padgham's a fantastic engineer, actually. The stuff he did with those bands and with XTC, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
But I just don't get it. No, not for me. I really like Abacab, funny enough. I think it's a great song.
Yeah, I like that too.
I've written some songs that I like. No Reply at All is very good. The horns are a bit cheesy and have that Phil Collins sound, but I like it. Me and Sarah Jane's a really good song, and I think it's something that could have been on like The Wild and the Wonderful. I think it's, although with a weird reggae beat. Dodo Lurker also has got a reggae feel, but I like it. Who Done It? It's almost like a nursery crime sort of ditty, like Harold the Barrel sort of thing. So they're all pretty good. But there's some not very good songs like Man on the Corner. It's like a Phil Collins solo song, really, for me. I'm 2.5, 2 stars, 2.5. I'm sort of dithering between both. I'll be generous and quite a jump, because I think it's a big jump, and there are some really good songs on it, like Abacab. So I'm going to go 2.5. I'm going to be super generous and go 2.5 stars. So that's my number 13. What have we got in at number 12 then?
Okay. So, is it 12 or is it 11? Can't think now.
It's 12.
Oh yes, I've missed one out. Sorry. Number 12, I've got We Can't Dance, which was the last album they did with Phil Collins. I actually quite like this album. A lot of people say, oh, it was a bit too long-winded, and it was long-winded. I think it would have been better as a single album than a double album. But I think it had some great songs on it. I mean, No Son of Mine and Driving the Last Spike, which is a Phil Collins song, that was good. Fading Lights is, I thought that was very reflective of their 70s stuff. So there were some good songs on it. But like I said, there's a bit too much filler. I think had it been a single album, it would have been better, I think. But it doesn't sound dated at all, not like Invisible Touch or Abacab. I think it sounds okay still, and I'll give it 2.5 out of 5.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, but I've got number 12, exactly the same album. So I've got the same points with We Can't Dance. Again, 2.5 stars. I've got some good songs on it. No Son of Mine's a really good song. I really like it. Jesus, He Knows Me is excellent. I think it's a really good song. It's really sarcastic video, really funny. I Can't Dance is a great song. If ZZ Top had recorded it, it would have been a fantastic bluesy sort of rock song. I think it's a really top tune. I quite like Dreaming While You Sleep. I think that's really good. There's some bland stuff on it as well. I think the album is way too long, but this fits in with the classic. Let's try and cram in as many songs as we can on a CD.
It was that year.
With the late 80s, early 90s, where it was 97. I think you used to get 77 minutes, on a CD, and people would try and fill it up. Well, in the old days, that would have been a double album. So if you'd gone 45 minutes, this would have been a really good album, actually, much higher in terms of the stars. But because there's too much, as you say, too much wastage on it, really, and therefore it knocks the ratings down. So same as you, and it gets 2.5 stars for me. It's really nice tunes on it. So what have you got in at number 11?
Okay, number 11, I've got From Genesis to Revelation, their first album, and I've put it sort of higher up than the others because I just think it was unbelievable that they managed to record all that. Just like I said, the still at school, sort of 16, 17 years old. I know the production's not great, but like you say, that was the Jonathan King thing, putting on the trumpets and the horns. But I think you can hear the potential. You can hear Tony's, piano playing, and he had a few quirky little tunes in there, and I think you could hear that they had some potential. And some of the songs I think were quite good. I love In the Beginning, and I like Where the Sour Turns to Sweet. And even some artists like Captain Sensible and Noel Gallagher, I've heard them really rate this album. They don't like Genesis, they're not Genesis fans, but they really like our first album. So you can show, it shows that there is some potential in there. I think, that these acts keep sort of rating it and mention it. But like I said, I just think, they were 16, 17 years old. I mean, it's not going to be great because it's the first album, but I think there are some decent little tunes on it. So I've put it at number 11.
How many stars?
Oh, and I give it 2.5. 2.5 stars.
Okay. Right then. In at number 11 for me is Invisible Touch, a much lambasted album I've written down here. It was the biggest commercial success, got to number 1. I think it knocked Peter Gabriel off the album chart at number 1 with So, which is somewhat ironic. The title song I've just got written here, it's okay if somewhat irritating. Tonight is a really good and dark song I've written here, and it sounds like a Peter Gabriel type song. Apart from the 80s toms on it, I really like it. I've written Land of Confusion, good pop song. In Too Deep, I've written absolutely awful. Anything She Does, again, it's got that horrible DX780s keyboard sound, which I absolutely hate. But then there's some other decent tracks on it. I really quite like the Brazilian and Domino, which sort of hark back to that sort of the prog roots. So they've still got bits of that in there, and it's not a bad album, actually. It's not terrible. There's some really nice stuff on it. I can see why it was a massive album at the time when it came out in '86. You can see why. Just not really for me. So again, it's 2.5 stars. Maybe it's even a teeny bit more, but I'll stick at 2.5, I think. And that's my number 11. Now we're on to the Big 10. What have you got in number 10?
Okay, number 10, I've got the self-titled Genesis album, which they call Shapes sometimes, because it didn't have a name on. I think it's the best of their 80s albums after Duke. It doesn't really sound dated like Invisible Touch and Abacab sounds dated. And I think it's got a nice selection of songs on it. I mean, the first side's really strong with Mama and Home by the Sea and Setting Home by the Sea. I also like Taking It All Too Hard. I even like Illegal Alien. I mean, people say it's a bit, it's not very politically correct, but I think it's quite a nice, upbeat, quirky song. I quite like that one. It doesn't suffer from being dated. I think you can put it on now and it still sounds good. It still sounds fresh.
It still sounds fresh, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. Yeah. I don't think it's dated at all, really. But I think it's just the best of their 80s albums after Duke, of course. And I'll give it just over 3 out of 5.
Right, good stuff. Yeah, interesting. For my number 10, I got, and then there were 3, which came out in March '78. Got a number 3 in the UK. So interesting. They're really, really popular at this point. So they've done all the hard graft, and then they've gone from really. This is the transition album for me in some respects. Although, well, maybe it's took the Duke as well. I've written it's a decent album. I've written it lacks Steve Hackett's progressive tones and elements. But it is a good album. It starts off with Down and Out. I think it's a really good song. I really like Undertow. I think Ballad of Big is great, with some very, it's very prog, terrific drumming on it. Snowbound's good. Burning Rope's good, but it should be stretched out for me, and it really lacks that sort of Hackett guitar solo on it as well, which would have been, would have took it up a notch for me. So this is where we're missing out on him at my point. The Lady Lies is a really nice song. Did you pick that in your top 10?
Yeah, yeah, I think
Uh,
it had it number 3 or something.
yeah,
I love
it's
the song.
it's yeah, it's a good song. You might hate this now. It reminds me of something that Chris de Burgh did with like the Spaceman Came Traveling. You know, I think it's a really good song.
I
And
think
then
it is really good.
and Follow You, Follow Me, it's just a nice ballad. And it sits outside of the album in some respects because it's
Mhm.
almost this is what we're going to start to do.
Yeah, it's like,
Um,
isn't it? It's
yeah,
like the
it's like an ending in some respects.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a good album. It is a good album. Definitely
Mhm.
get played a lot more for me because it's an album I've played for years. And
Mhm.
I've got it down at 3 stars. So it's a good album. It's a
It
good
is.
album.
It is.
But yeah, I'm maybe underrating it actually because I haven't played it that much, but it'll
Mhm.
certainly get played a lot more. So what
Mhm.
have you got in it, number 9?
Right, number 9, I've got Duke. Um, Duke, I think the production sounds really good on this album. It's the best of their 80s album, but I think it's an album of two halves. It's sort of half of it's quite sort of atmospheric and still a bit proggy in places, and the other half is kind of love ballads and sort of shorter love songs. And I think if it had been all or one, if it had been all progressive or all ballads and love songs, I think it would have flowed better. But I think it's a bit disjointed because it's like an album of two halves. But I love Duchess. I love Guide Vocal and Heat Haze. Please Don't Ask as well. The Phil Collins song. I think that's really a nice song. It really fits well on the album. I wish they'd put In the Air Tonight on because I think Phil wrote it
Yeah.
around the same time, but obviously he had that on his own solo album. But I think In the Air Tonight would have been nice.
Well,
But
Johnny Banks claims that Collins didn't play them, and
yeah,
Collins claims he did, didn't
there's
he? You know.
a dispute, isn't it, whether he did or whether he didn't. But I definitely think had they heard it, they would have put it on the album. But who knows? We'll never know. The only thing I dislike about the album though is the cover. Like this
Yeah.
cover here, it looks like something. You'd think they've gone to the local primary school and just sort of told them to like draw a picture and put the picture on the art on because like up to this point, all the 70s albums had been really creative
Yeah.
and some beautiful covers on some of the
Yeah.
albums, but this just looks like they went and handpicked the local the best student at art to do a cover for them. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was intentional. I think they intended it to look like that, but I just don't like the cover at all. I don't think it suits the album, and so that puts me off a little bit. But nevertheless, I still think it's a decent enough album, and I'll give it just over 3 out of 5.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, my number 9 is Genesis album, the self-titled album. It's a really good album. I think it's a really good album. There's some really good
Mhm.
songs on it. I mean, Mama, which is just fantastic with the beat
Is.
again. It's almost got that In the Air Tonight sort of feel to it in some respects. And with the laugh which he stole from Grandmaster Flash, which he openly admitted is great. It works perfectly. It's a brilliant, dark, menacing song. It's something that could have been on Peter Gabriel's Melt album. It's absolutely outstanding. That's All, which is on our top 10 songs show. So I'm not going to go into it, but needless to say, I think it's exceptional. I think it's a great pop song. It could have been written by Paul McCartney. It's truly brilliant. Home by the Sea, it's just a super pop prog mix. It really is. And then Second Home by the Sea, which is a great title, is also great. I've written the same as you about Illegal Alien. I said it's a weird song, an uncomfortable accent, I think is the phrase I'm going to use. Yeah, it's a really catchy song. It's
It
a
is.
nice tune, and it's one of them songs you'll hum around the house.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yeah. Is it just the one there's some Do It as well, which I've written here as a great funk riff. It's a pretty good album. I think it's a really good album. There's some really good songs on it. As you say, the production is fantastic. It really could be made today. It doesn't sound dated. It doesn't have that sort of 80s drum sound that Abacab sort of bizarrely suffers with a bit earlier on. And then some of the later albums obviously suffer far more with it. And this one's shoehorned in the middle and it sounds brilliant. And I've given this 3.5 stars. I think it's a really good album. Really good album.
Yes.
Really like it. Yeah, play it regularly. So there you have it. What have you gone into number 8?
Right, number 8. Well, I think this now is the territory we're getting into where any of these albums coming up are really true classic Genesis albums, that they haven't really made a bad album from this point on. But number 8, I have to put one at number 8, and I'll start with this one, which is Trespass. It was their first album from the 70s, so just after they'd finished Charterhouse in their public school. And it's a gentle pastoral kind of acoustic album. It's very gentle. It's quite nice to listen to. But I was going to say, what's remarkable about it is they were only about 19 or 20 when they wrote it. I mean, some of the songs on it are excellent, like The Knife and Stagnation. I mean, you know, I couldn't have written those songs at the age of 40, never mind 20, you know. I mean, they're great songs. And I think they've got to thank their friend Richard McPhail. I think they left school and they hadn't really sort of got a direction. They didn't know if they were going to continue after they'd done that first album. And Richard McPhail's parents lent them their house to sort of hone their skills and sort of, you know, create their sort of you know, their music and their style, and I think it's thanks to him really that they continued, because, you know, I think they were just going to go off to university or go to college and do their own thing. And I think because they had that time in the house to create their, you know, their music and perfect their style, I think that's what made them go on. And then they got their record contract after that, their Charisma record contract. So like I say, it's a really good album for some, you know, so for people so young, and I'll give it about 3.5 out of 5, because there are one or two songs that I think could be better, but obviously because it was, you know, early days, there was still sort of perfecting their skills really. So I'll give it about 3.5 out of 5.
Well, interestingly, Richard McPhail's book's excellent. If people get the chance to read it or listen to the audio book, it's terrific.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it, actually. Really enjoyed it.
Yes, yeah.
Good read. And yeah, I could have had a signed copy of the album about 2 months ago, and I was skint, so I had to turn it down. And it was all 5 of them with Mayhew on as well, like, you know, and Ant Phillips, where they did a gig in Newcastle, and my mate got it signed.
Right.
I wished I bought it now. I'm sort of kicking myself in hindsight, but there you have it.
You're worth something now.
Yeah, well, yeah, I wished I'd got it. But a terrific album. It will be mentioned soon. But my number 8 is The Wind and Wuthering. It's the second album from 1976, which is just incredible, really. Two terrific albums within a year. It's a really good album, really good album. There's a lot of classic tracks on this album. Earl and Moore, Battlefield Scottish Rebellion, which is good opener. One for the Vine is a great song. A song a bit like Tommy by The Who, where it's about a prophet where people follow him but they go into battle. I really like that. Your Own Special Way is a fantastic ballad. It is absolutely beautiful. Just terrific song. What Gorilla? I love it. Jazz fusion. They're massively into jazz fusion at this point now, the band. Phil Collins in particular, who's playing drums with Brand X, and his drumming is at his peak at this point here. His drumming is as good as anybody that's existed in rock music at this point. And it's an extension of One for the Vine, apparently. I didn't realise. Blood on the Rooftop, sorry. It's mentioned on the other show. Fantastic song. Cynical ballad about news. Terrific song, mainly by Hackett. The classical intro is great. It's one of the best songs I think they've ever written. 2 instrumentals are good, based on Wuthering Heights. There's an argument for me. I would have maybe removed them in favour of 3 tracks that they also recorded and didn't put on. I would have maybe put 2 of them on, such as Inside and Out, which should have made it as a great song, and Pigeons should have been on the album as well. It's an absolutely fantastic song, and they released it as an EP. It was the last songs to feature Steve Hackett before he left the band, and just brilliant. Should have been on the album for me. And then obviously the last track on the album is Afterglow, which is a great song and a live staple. For me at this point, Wind and Wuthering's 4 stars. It's an excellent album, a really top-notch album. Could have been higher if they'd had those two tracks on. Could have been close to 5 stars if it had those two tracks on for me. So there you go. That's mine. What's your next album choice for number 7?
Right, well, number 7, I've got this one here, Nursery Crime. It might be number 7 in my list, but it's number 1 for album covers. I think the sleeve design and the sleeve art on the front is really sort of creative. It really draws you into the album. It's quite bizarre and it's quite dark and mysterious. Like you're sort of looking at her face and thinking, what is she thinking? The lady Cynthia on the front, well, she's a girl really, but it really draws you into the album. And it's got some of their best songs on. It's got Musical Box, which is a really great opening track. It's got Fountain of Salmalsis. It's got The Return of the Giant Hogweed, which I think is great. Harlequin, I think that's a lovely little song as well. So it's got some really good Genesis tracks on it. The only thing that I sort of dislike about it, or have put it down sort of at number 7 in my list, is because of the production, because it's such an early album from about 1971. Obviously the technology and the sound production wasn't up to scratch. So I think had it been released a few years later, it would have sounded, you know, like wonderful, you know. But I think having said that, they had Steve and Phil had just joined, and that made a big difference, because the drums came out, you know, with Phil's drumming and Steve Hackett's guitar playing, I think really brought the album alive. So it's a good album, but like I say, the production lets it down slightly. But even so, it's got some great classic Genesis songs on it, and I'd give it about 3 3/4, just under 4 out of 5. And that's my rating for that one.
Yeah, the Nick Davies remix that came out in 2008 is excellent. It really sort of, I know it's got a little bit of criticism of some, but they always do. All the remixes always get some sort of criticism, but I think it's fabulous. It sounds really good now. They've really cleaned it up and
Yes,
made it sound really fat, if that makes sense. It's an album, beautiful, rounded sound. Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we come to that at some point. My number 7 is Trespass. It's a 4-star album for me. It's a great album. This is almost to me their debut, really. This is when they become a proper band. Looking for Someone is one of my favorite ever opening lines. With Peter Gabriel's soulful voice just singing on his own, really. Got the keys and then him, and it sounds fantastic. Absolutely love it. I agree with the production at this point, though, because the drums sound a bit far away and a little bit thin, really. Not great. Mayhew wasn't a great drummer, if I'm being honest, on the album. He's not bad. But you can tell on the next album when Phil Collins drums, you go, oh my Lord, that's a step up. It's a step up in playing. And again, Anthony Phillips, not a bad guitarist, but Steve Hackett's levels, I think is the phrase I'm going to use. So the music on the album I've written is urgent, good. Some really terrific songs. White Mountain, this epic tale. It's the sort of thing I would imagine Iron Maiden to do, actually, in terms of the theme. This big, long, drawn-out song. Stagnation, I've just got written, great song. I like the pastoral tones of things like Dusk, and The Knife is just a masterpiece. It's brilliant. It's proper prog rock, metal almost as well. It's a really great song. Live, on the live album in particular, it's incredible. About 9 minutes. I think they had to chop it down as well. They worked it out that they had to do a shorter orchestration for the albums.
It's my ringtone, that one.
Is it really?
Yes.
Oh, that's different.
Sort of wakes you up when the phone rings. So
yeah, it beats my theme tune to Minder, but there you have it. Yeah, it's fantastic. That's a great, it's a really good album. I've given it 4 stars. I think it's very, very good and gets played a lot. So there you have it. That's my album in at number 7. What have you got in at number 6 then?
Okay, so number 6, I've got this one, and then there were 3. It's what I consider to be their last great prog album, really. I think up until this stage, all their albums were fairly progressive and innovative, and I think this is the last of the last great prog albums. It was, I think, probably their most underrated album, because they lost a lot of fans when Steve and Peter left, and then they gained a lot of fans when Phil Collins, you know, started having hits in the 80s. So this album's kind of in between the two periods, and they lost a lot of fans. But I think it's a great album. Every song on it just about is a really sort of classic tune to listen to. I love Snowbound. I love Burning Rope. Many Too Many is a great Tony Banks song, and so is The Lady Lies. Like you said earlier, it was one of my top 3 Genesis tracks. It's just a great song. The chorus and the build up to it and the outro, and there's only three people playing on that record, but it sounds, sounds like they've got a whole orchestra on it. It's really a really good track. And then of course there's the storytelling element that they often had in earlier records. The only thing that probably I dislike about the album is probably Follow You, Follow Me, that tags on the end. It's not a bad song, but I think it doesn't sort of flow with the rest of the album. The rest of the album is quite atmospheric and gentle, and sort of, it's I think it's slightly it's sort of the start of the beginning of their new era, really, isn't it, that song? So it's kind of it's quite apt that it does come at the end of the album, but I just think it doesn't sort of join on with the rest of the album that well. But like I said, it's a great album, and it's very underrated. It should be listened to a lot more, and I'll give it 4 out of 5.
Okay, so we're into 4-star territory now. Good choice. My number 4 is Duke, which came out in 1980. I've got written here their first UK #1 album. It contains one of the best songs on it, Turn It On Again, which is a great song, and I mentioned on the other show as well. Impossible to dance to because of the drum beat changing. There's also some great songs on it. Misunderstanding is a big hit, and I think it's fabulous. Really soulful tune, actually. Duchess has got a real brood and ominous feel to it, which I really like. So yeah, I've got Misunderstanding here. I've forgot to add some points here. It Swings is really catchy. I've got on. What else have I got written on here? Alone Again, a nice ballad. And then I've got written here, Duke's Travels and Duke's Ends are very prog based at the end. So this again, it's a sort of switch back to the old stuff. I really like this album. I think it's a really terrific album. It's a real mix between the poppy side and the prog side. It's sort of in between. I think it's a really good album. I've given it 4 stars. Really terrific. As you say, the album, Steve's awful, but the production sounds really good as well. It still sounds modern and fresh, and a fabulous album. Really good. Really nice length of songs as well, actually. So yeah, Duke for me, 4 stars.
Okay.
So what have you got in at number 5?
5. Well, this album, it might be a bit of surprise because a lot of Genesis fans put it at number 1 or in their top 3. But for number 5, I've got Selling England by the Pound. I think it's a good album. I mean, I do like this album. It is a strong Genesis album, and it also contains some of the best Genesis records. It's got Firth of Fifth, it's got Cinema Show, and I love the Battle of Epping Forest. I love the way that Peter has all the different characters, and I love that start where it builds with that kind of marching band sound at the beginning, at the intro. It's a good album, but like I say, I just don't enjoy it as much as some of the later Genesis albums. So they had so many classics in that 70s period that, some album had to come at number 5, and this is the one that had to come at number 5 for me. But it is a good album. The only song I really think out of place on the album is More Fool Me. I think it would have been more suited, at a sort of later stage, maybe at Duke and one of their 80s albums. I think it's a bit sort of, it doesn't really match the vibe of the rest of the album, because the rest of the album is quite surreal and a lot of storytelling, and More Fool Me just seems to sort of stick out of place a little bit. So because of that reason, that's why I put it at number 5. But it's still, honestly, a very good album. You can't really fault it apart from that. And I'll give it a 4 out of 5.
Yeah. Controversial, I think is the phrase I'm going to use. Yeah, it's still to come for me, that one. My number 5 is Nursery Crime. came out in 71 on Charisma. This is when Collins and Steve Hackett come in and significantly improved the band. It's mentioned on my 1971 Top 10 album show. That's how highly I rate it. At this point, they started incorporating the Mellotron because of Steve Hackett's insistence. And I've mentioned other songs before. So you've mentioned Musical Box, which is this really dark gothic song about a young lad called Harold. And he ends up sort of, it's a mad story. Go and watch it on our top 10 songs. I'm not going to go into it, but it's a crazy song. Involves sex, murder, and everything else. Incorporates elements of the Who almost into it as well in terms of the play, and it's absolutely amazing. We have some really great tracks on this. You got the pastoral side of like Absent Friends and Harlequin. You got the proto metal side of Giant Hogweed with Hackett doing his sort of guitar tapping, which people weren't doing at the time. Remember, this is 7 years before Eddie Van Halen, and he's doing all that doodly stuff, which is great. I love the whimsical Harold the Barrel, one of my favorite Genesis songs. Yeah, bizarrely about somebody wanting to commit suicide. Yeah, it's really funny. It's an ironically really funny song, which begs the question how, but it is. It's just really well put together. And then, you finish off with the Fountain of Salmacis again, which is also a really terrific song. I've given the album 4.5 stars, and I would have given it 5 if they'd included Twilight Alehouse, which was recorded for it. And I think it should have been on it. It's, again, another real hard, rocky sort of type track, quite calm, and then really, again, quite aggressive and violent on it. Fabulous song. So, yeah. So, there we go. Nursery Crime, 4.5 stars for me. So, Ursula, what have you got in at number 4?
Okay, number 4, I've got this classic, Foxtrot. I think it's a very strong album. I can't fault this album at all in the slightest. It took me a few listens to get into it because I was quite young when I first started listening to it, when I first heard it. And I thought the atmosphere was a bit dark and a bit sort of creepy when I first heard it, but after a few listens, once you get past that initial stage, you think, wow, it's a fabulous record. I mean, there's not a bad track on it. It starts with Watcher of the Skies, which is a great atmospheric song, which I think they opened a lot of their live shows with. And it's got some great tracks on it. Get 'Em Out by Friday, I think, is a wonderful tune. It's full of highs and low points, and it's got Peter Gabriel's characters in that he brings in throughout the song. Timetable's a lovely Tony Banks number. And then obviously on side 2, you've got the wonderful Supper's Ready, which we talked about on the last podcast. I mean, Supper's Ready is such an epic song that, I don't think any fan could dismiss it in the slightest, because it's just a real powerful song about good versus evil, and it goes on for over 20 minutes. It's just 20 minutes of pure bliss, really. And I like the way it starts with Horizons, which is Steve's little sort of introduction to it. It's like a precursor for it. But the whole album from start to finish, you just cannot fault it. It's just an excellent masterpiece. And I've put it I've put it at number 4, but it could have been higher, really, because every time I listen to it, you hear something extra that you think, oh, it really, really should be in the top 3 or the top 2. So it's a very strong album, really good album. Can't fault it at all. I'll give it just under 5 out of 5.
You're very harsh, you, Ursula.
I am.
My number 4 is Trick of the Tail. We're at 5-star territory now for me. It's a great album, a truly great album. Came out in 76, was a commercial success. Famously, of course, Phil Collins replaces Peter Gabriel on vocals. And again, like some of those great albums where somebody else in the band's replaced a singer, or they've got somebody else in, when you think of replacing a singer within the band, you think of Pink Floyd, and then somebody else in, you think of AC/DC. And this album is a first album post the original singer. Is incredible. I think there's only probably Back in Black which would compare it in terms of where it's not top what's before, but certainly at least equaled, and is incredible. You think, wow, I didn't see that coming, and I don't think anybody's seen this coming, because originally they talked about being just an instrumental band, which is hilarious when you think about it.
Yeah.
and it's just full of great songs, song after song of brilliance. And I first heard this album originally when I keep harping about having the shop, but when I had it, I had a bootleg version of it. So I had all the like outtakes, and I really liked it. I had all the outtakes, and it was great. And I listened to that before I heard this version of the proper album, if you like. It's just great. Dance the Volcano, superb. Great prog intro. What a song. Entangles, I've got written here, absolutely beautiful. It's got a nursery rhyme feel to it. And again, it could be on nursery rhymes. Squonk, fantastically lyrical. It's about something from North America. Once you capture it, it disappears. And it's got a really heavy Led Zeppelin drums feel to it, that song. Really great drums. Then you've got the lighter side of Robbery, Assault and Battery again, going back to that Harold the Barrel feel, which I mentioned earlier on. They're like whimsy, but good. Ripples, brilliant, really good song, which seems to at times link almost to The Lamb. I think lyrically there's little elements to it. I really like Hackett's subdued guitar on it as well on that track. It's just sort of in the background, but adds colour to it. Trick of the Tail is this is going to make people laugh. It's got an early 70s feel to it. It always reminds me of that sort of happy type song that sort of Rod, Jane and Freddie would do on Rainbow. You know, I think it's got that really sort of that real 70s feel to it, you know, and I often think of every time I hear, I think of Rod, Jane and Freddie. It's just a bit weird that they have it. And then, and then Los Endos. It was a great fusion song. Collins is again peak drumming. Fabulous song. 5-star album all day long. I love the artwork as well, which captured the themes within the songs, and it fits into all the previous albums as well. So what a great album. And it could have been higher, as you mentioned earlier on. It could have been higher. I feel quite harsh putting this at number 4, but it does get 5 stars. So what have you got in at number 3?
Well, number 3, I've got your number 4, which is A Trick of the Tail. To be honest, any of these top 3 albums for me have been at number 1 at some point, but for this week, I've got this at number 3. And purely for the fact that it was probably the first Genesis, well, it was the first Genesis album that I listened to, because my older brother used to play it to death, and I just remember growing up listening to it. And I just love all the characters at the front and on the back of the sleeve, and all the songs inside relate to the characters. There's a real storybook feel to it. And I think Tony Banks has to be commended for the album, because he was involved in every single track. And I mean, every track is a real masterpiece. There's not a weak song on it, and just shows the standard of his writing ability and his songwriting and his musicianship. And I mean, he's such a great musician, and it stands out on this album. And even as far as like the song list goes, I mean, the first 3 songs on that album, they just sort of blow your mind. Dance on a Volcano is a great opening track. Then it goes into the beautiful Entangled, which has got a lovely ethereal feel to it. And then obviously it crashes into Squonk afterwards, and it's just the first side of that album. It's so strong, and the second side's good too as well. I mean, even the lesser tracks, like you say, Trick of the Tail, maybe Robbery, Assault and Battery. I mean, Robbery, Assault and Battery's got a great instrumental bit. Again, Tony Banks. I mean, you can't fault him on this album at all. It's a perfect album. And like I said, it was the first album that I heard by them, so I've got a special sort of fondness for it. And I think it's just great. It's not a bad song on it. So I'll give it about 5 out of 5. 5 out.
Yeah, we've reached that point. Well, my number 3, like you, could easily have been number 1, and probably has been at some point, is the one with the Betty Swanwick artwork, and that's Selling England by the Pound. Of all the albums, this is the most English sounding album. Came out in 1973. It's fantastic album with no bad songs on it. Every one for me is absolutely outstanding. You've got and obviously people who watch this know the albums, of course. I'm not going to go too much into it, but Dancing with the Moonlight Night, you know, it evokes that sort of folk, Gabriel's folky intro, which I really love. And he brought it back for a short while in 2016. He did the opening lines. It's got loads of sort of 70s English references like the paper, Green Shield stamps, all that. I absolutely love it. You know, I think it's great. We've got Firth of Forth again. I think it's mentioned on the top 10 songs. So go and watch it. A masterpiece of a song. The piano playing is brilliant. The whole song is outstanding. Steve Hackett is incredible on it as well. More Fool Me. I love More Fool Me. Collins on vocals. His similarities to Gabriel's is obvious. When I first heard this the first time, I was thinking, he sounds like Peter Gabriel.
Yeah,
I was like really struggling to decipher who was, you know, I was thinking, is it Peter Gabriel? Is it Phil Collins? And they're so within that like area in terms of vocal range. They're so similar at times. It's really quite scary. You get a few bands who have members in the same bands who sound similar. It's amazing, that one. Other tracks, of course, Battle of Epping Forest is brilliant. Too many lyrics in it. It's too crammed. I agree with Tony Banks. There's too many words in it. It's based upon the London gangs who would fight at Epping Forest. And I watched the documentary on it recently. And because there was references to the Peaky Blinders as well there. And it's very, very well done, actually. I love the lyrics, the horse riding reference, you know, with Georgie moves in from the outside left. Very funny. Makes us laugh. But again, it's too dense, but it's a great song. After the Ordeal, lovely instrumental. Cinema Show is fantastic. Again, just a great song sort of finish on. It's marvelous, lovely ending. So it's a truly great album. A little mention as well to the unfinished song Deja Vu, which Hackett and Gabriel were sort of halfway through writing and it never made the album. And then it got finished years later and Hackett stopped putting it on the tour. Lovely song. If you haven't heard it, go and listen to it. You can see why it would fit in on the album. Where? I'm not quite sure. But lovely album. Absolutely top-notch 5-star album all day long. Could have easily been number one. Could have easily have been number one. Today, it makes number 3 for me. But again, tomorrow it might be different. What have you got in at number 2 then?
Right, well, number 2, I've got the sister album to Trick of the Tail, because they both came out in the same year, which is astounding in itself, and that's Wind and Wuthering. Wind and Wuthering, for me, I don't think there's a bad song. Well, there's not even a bad moment, let alone a bad song. But like from start to finish, it's full of atmosphere, full of sort of soundscapes and dreamy sort of music and powerful sort of, parts to the songs that it's a really good listen from beginning to end. Not a bad track on it. And even the shorter songs like Your Own Special Way and What Gorilla, I think they're still really good songs. I mean, Your Own Special Way is a lovely Mike Rutherford tune. People say, oh, it's a bit sort of wishy-washy and a bit lovey-dovey, but I think it fits in beautifully to the album. And even What Gorilla, like you said, it was kind of jazz fusion-y. It was, really good drumming by Phil Collins, and I love the keyboard part with Tony Banks. It's great. And I actually disagree with what you were saying. I think it's perfect as it is. I don't think we should have did the other. I think as that album stands, it's perfect, just the way it is. But I love, like I say, just about all the songs on it are my favourite songs. I love All in a Mouse's Night. Afterglow's a perfect ballad. 11 I can't speak. 11 of March. I'm talking too fast. They're just, Blood on the Rooftops. I mean, there's just one classic after another. It's just a superb album, and that's why I've got it at number 2. And I'd give it a 5 out of 5.
Yeah, great stuff. They always say you never forget your first love, and my first love was this by them. Okay, so as you can see, it's signed by all the members of the band.
Excellent.
Long story how, but there you have it. And that's my number 2. It's an incredible album. I've got written here, came out in 1972. It was the first album along with the live album, which I mentioned earlier on, that I ever got into. And just every track on it, as you rightly said, is fantastic. Watches of the Skies, it's really dark. That sort of keyboard sound that they had, and apparently that was the one track that they did 2 tracks as an encore when they did The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and that was the first one that they would do. And Gabriel would have all that fancy makeup on around his eyes, so it would illuminate in the dark. The tribute band, the Musical Box, do it. They do it really well, actually, to be fair to them. And I've seen them do it on the Last Lamb tour, and they did the same encore, and it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. What a great song that is. Timetable, fantastic, about kings and queens, and it's got this real Arthurian sort of feel to it. Get them up by Fridays, real social history. And again, you mentioned the characters thing with the character of the Winkler to winkle somebody out, very clever. Can Utility, the coastline's brilliant. Horizons, lovely. And then we've mentioned before on the top 10 show, so I'm not going to go into it, but Steve Hackett's, sorry, not Steve Hackett, the band in terms of Supper's Ready is just unbelievable after Steve Hackett's beautiful classical piece. Supper's Ready is one of the greatest songs ever written. It's absolutely brilliant. Just 23 minutes of sheer brilliance. So there's not an awful lot I've said because you've already done most of the talking about it. And for me, all day long, Foxtrot is a 5-star album. It's absolutely top notch.
Definitely.
So Ursula, number 1. We've both got the same number 1. Go on then, go for it.
Well, there can only be one number 1, and it's got to be this one, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Not only is it my favourite Genesis album, I think it's actually probably my most favourite album ever by any artist, because I've never heard anything ever before like it or ever since afterwards in the same vein. It's just a real timeless soundscape of surreal imagery. It's dark, it's edgy, it's aggressive, it's surreal, it's beautiful. You can't really explain it. It seems to come from a different dimension. It's a real cinematic kind of album, and I think they were going to make it into a film at one point, but it's hard to describe. It's just, it's aggression wrapped up with beauty. Even the filler in it, is all killer because it's a double album, but there's no weak part in the album at all. It's just a truly great masterpiece. And I think it was even punk before its time, because if you look at the character Rael on the front,
yeah.
So he had short hair. I mean, how many young men in the 1970s had short hair in the early 1970s, 1974? So it's like a punk kind of atmosphere.
Well, he's classed as a Puerto Rican street punk, isn't he?
Yeah. So it was like punk before its time, and nobody really understands the story. I mean, Peter Gabriel's probably the only one who understands the story because he wrote the lyrics. But I don't think you need to understand the story. I think it just you just get swept in with the whole atmosphere of it all. But I mean, the lyrics are so classic. Like, for example, Carpet Crawlers. You think it's part of the story where he's trapped underground and trying to get out. But then if you really look at the lyrics, it could be about conception and the art of making a baby. It's such sort of clever, genius writing. And I was lucky enough to be at a book signing earlier this year, and Peter Gabriel was there, and I was so starstruck I couldn't even look him in the eye properly, and I'd have loved to have asked him about his lyrics and and what his sort of thoughts were behind the songs, but I was so starstruck I couldn't. So I do apologise if you ever, in the unlikely event he's watching, but I do apologise. But I'd have loved to have asked him, because but not only on that album, some of the lyrics on, like Selling You by the Pound and Nursery Crime, they're so, you just wonder where those stories come from. It's quite amazing. But like I said, the album's nearly 50 years old, and I've never heard anything quite like it in 50 years. And I doubt, if I live another 50 years, which is unlikely as well, but I doubt I'll ever hear anything like it in the future either. It's just a great sort of mind-blowing piece of work, piece of art, and that's why it's number 1. And I give it, if you can give it 5.5 or 5 plus out of 5.
No, it is an amazing album. I agree. It's a 5-star album all day long. It's my number 1 as well, of course. It's just an incredible album. I know on his recent tour, which I went to see him recently in London, it was fantastic. And
Yeah.
he'd rehearsed Carpet Crawlers and then dropped it last minute, which is a
All
shame.
right.
I'd like to have seen that, but never mind.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just an amazing album. And I think if it had made sense as an album, it would have actually taken something away from it.
Yes, I think so.
You
I think
know,
if you look deeply into the lyrics, it's
yeah,
you know, it would
I think it
confuse
would
you.
remove that little element. There are
Yeah.
most great concept albums have a narrative that runs, but is maybe not clearly
Mhm.
perfect. I mean, my other
Mhm.
favorite double concept album by a mile is Quadrophenia by The Who, which
Oh
is
yeah.
another
Yeah.
incredible album for me.
Uh-huh.
And again, even on that, it was a narrative, but it's not 100% perfect, you know.
Mhm.
And I think that's the way they should be. An amazing album. As I say, rarely do you get a great double album, in my opinion, but this is without a doubt one of them. Um, Allegorically, it links to the sort of Pilgrim's Progress, about possibly about descending into some sort of place and then escaping from it. You know, hell in that case, but we're not sure on this one.
Mhm.
Um, there are links to the film El Topo, which I actually
Right.
purchased, which is mental. If you ever get the chance to watch it, it's weird. And you can see
Mhm.
where Gabriel's borrowed ideas possibly from.
Uh-huh.
Who knows?
Uh-huh.
So there are clear links to it. Mad film, absolutely bonkers film, but there you have it.
Mhm.
The lyrics are amazing. The musicianship's really, really top notch on this as well. I think this is the band at
Mhm.
their peak musically. Phil Collins said it's got his favorite drum sound on it.
Mhm. Mhm.
In his favorite album, I believe, by Genesis. Yeah, it's ironically Tony Banks' least favorite album by them,
Yeah.
which is weird.
Yeah.
Um, Fly on a windshield. It could have been on Physical Graffiti. The drums are that heavy, brilliant. I love the tones and the shades on the album. You know, Cocoon,
Mhm.
Cocoon, that soft and gentle thing, and then it drifts into The Cage, which is one of their
Mhm.
top 10 songs for me. Again, look at the top 10
Yeah.
song show; it's brilliant. I love how songs segue into others, like Hell is Heart, and then it goes into Counting Out Time, which is another fantastic tune.
Mhm.
If I had to do my top 10 songs again now, I would probably switch my number one and go with Chamber of 32 Doors, which I
Mhm.
think is one of the greatest songs ever written. I really think it's incredible.
Mhm.
Uh, Other Magic songs, the whole album's brilliant. Like, as you say, there's
It
no
is.
filler on it. Lily White Lilith, anyway, Into Rapids, it's all absolutely top notch.
Mhm.
It's just an incredible album by an incredible band.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm happy the way they went on to something else, because it would have just been repeating themselves if they carried on doing the same style.
Mhm.
So they did break new boundaries, but for me, this is their peak. So it'll be interesting to see what other people have. We've both got The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which I thought that would be the case. I almost had
Mhm.
my Lamb T-shirt on today, but I went against it. And
Mhm.
yeah, there are choices. Feel free to leave your lists, folks. We'd be interested to see what you have. Again, as usual, subscribe to the channel, which you always say. Please do hit the likes as well, because it boosts us up on the rankings charts. But I hope you've enjoyed the show. All right. Send those lists in. I'm sure they'll all be totally different to us. Of course, there's no right answers. These are just our opinions. So please don't kick off and say, oh, that's terrible, blah, blah, blah. That's just our thoughts, folks. But we'd love to hear yours as well. All right. Till next time. Take care, everybody. Goodbye.